Former Representative Adam Kinzinger, you were just the person I really wanted to talk to today as people come on board here and people interested in the events of the day. And the reason is this, because I think uh, you're a straight shooter, you're a patriot, and you love this country. You've demonstrated that, and it just feels like it's one of those bad times that we're increasingly getting for our country. So I wanted to talk to you about the news, the killing of Charlie Kirk. And first, it occurred to me, you kind of came up while he did. Did you ever meet him?
No, never ran into him. I obviously knew about him because he kind of started his boy wonder thing really pretty young. But no, we never, I was always just politically speaking, we were always kind of butting heads because he was obviously much more conservative than me, much more into that, like, we have to take this to the wall. And I'm much more of a centrist who thinks both sides need to get together. So, but the thing is, it's that like, I respected his ability to make an argument. I mean, you can dislike somebody's arguments and respect their ability to make it. And you have to say that whatever you felt about him, was a very consequential figure. I mean, I think there's no doubt that he owns some of the responsibility for young people turning rightward, what he was able to do. So while I didn't necessarily like his politics, and I don't like that we have to always say that, but he was a human being, deserved to live, made a heck of a lot of arguments, and very compellingly. And, as we saw yesterday, was willing to stand in front of a crowd and make those arguments. And that's rare.
Yeah, that is rare. And to me, you know, that's all American, right? That he was literally killed speaking what he believed in, under a tent that proclaimed his willingness to hear what you had to say. Prove me wrong, it said, right? I mean, I think that is not just all American, it's the only way out of this mess we're in, that we'll engage with ideas that are hard for us to hear, that we believe passionately are wrong, if that's the case, or even hateful. And it was interesting. My wife asked me a question. She said, well, what if our son, right, who's just turned 11 years old, all of a sudden started saying, I'm with Charlie or Andrew Tate. Tate is a different kind of character, but he's a sex trafficker. But and I would you let him? And I said, yeah. I mean, I would engage him. I would try and I wouldn't say you can't look at that, because for the first thing you get when you tell a kid you can't look at,
They're going to look.
is they're going to look. But engage, because it seems sometimes to me that the people are the cancel or whatever, I'm not going to listen to that person, he's illegitimate to listen to, weaken their muscles for argument and engagement. You know what I mean? You got to win the argument. You can't just say, I'm shutting it down, because it will continue. And the point you made about he was probably instrumental in the turn of young people to the right. But it's hard to listen to somebody who says things. For me, it's hard to listen to somebody who says things like he did about women, about Black people, about all kinds of things.
Yeah, and Ukraine. I mean, this was a guy that repeatedly said he didn't care about Ukraine. He was basically, I don't know if he ever expressed pro-Russian beliefs, but certainly anti-Ukrainian beliefs. And that angers me, right? Especially when I see every day what happens in Ukraine. But again, and this is where people need to understand, do we believe in the First Amendment? I know you and I do. I think most people do. The First Amendment is not there to protect the speech we're comfortable with. It's there to protect the speech we're uncomfortable with. And I think one thing that Charlie Kirk did show us is that compelling arguments still have a place in society today. We've kind of gotten to this point where it feels like there's no point in debating. There's no point in, bringing new stuff to the table in arguments, because people are just in their side and they're not going to listen. Well, Charlie Kirk showed that over time, again, I didn't agree with most of his arguments, but he brought arguments to the youth. He would fight back, and it had an effect. And I know people take that and say debate works, right? And the other thing is just, do we believe in democracy? And this is why I was so passionate about January 6th, why I was so passionate about when Paul Pelosi was attacked, when Minnesota lawmakers were killed, or the one was killed and the one. It's like democracy was invented for the sole purpose of preventing violence, right? Because up to this point, violence was, kind of most of human history, violence is the thing that solved disputes, right? You didn't like what somebody did, you fight them, or countries would fight other countries. And we decided that we can't live like that, particularly in a country with so many people from different backgrounds. And so we created democracy. When you have violence that comes out of that, it shows democracy is failing, or at least it's, as a pilot term, it's kind of on the buffet. And I think it's important for us to recognize that. And again, Terry, the cycle of this is not good. When I see people, I've seen some people celebrate the shooting of, the United Healthcare CEO.
Yeah.
I've seen them celebrate the shooting of Charlie Kirk. I've certainly seen people celebrating the shooting of the Minnesota lawmakers. So no matter what side of the debate you're on this, the only thing that comes from this is more violence, increasing violence, a cycle of violence. And you can never talk to a person that came out of a failing democracy or civil strife and have anybody ever tell you that they were better off or their country was better off because of the cycle of violence. It always ends up worse for everybody.
Yeah, that puts me in mind. You just got back from Croatia. I was in Bosnia in 1983, 83, 82, 83. And I remember people telling me it just seemed like that. Somebody told me about it. They were coming back from their vacation on the Croatian coast. They were Serbian. They stopped where they always stopped for dinner or whatever on the way back. And they walked in, it was all men in the restaurant. And they got a look because their license plate and because of who they were. And she knew that was coming. But I want to ask you about this violence. This violence certainly meant to silence speech. You're out there pretty publicly. You have been for a long time. You paid a price for the kind of speech for what you believe in and the way you're willing to speak it. How do you deal with when you heard this? I'm sure you must have reflected first on the horror of it, but also on your father, how did it make you feel about what you're doing?
It's a great question. I've thought about writing about this and, on the Substack, and it's like, that's a tough one to do because on the one hand, I don't really have fear. Okay. I want to be clear about that. I probably should, but I don't. But there is a part of me, I was telling my wife or somebody yesterday, I'm like, for a few minutes, I went through why am I doing this? Is it worth it? Right. And that's just being brutally honest. And I think if somebody tells you they never go through that, they're probably lying. Probably everybody watching us right now goes through that every day. And so, yeah, it takes a toll. I mean, since I've been in Congress, but particularly since, let's go January 6th, I've lived under this threat, right? A threat that I shouldn't have to live under. And so I think it does take a mental toll, a psychological toll, maybe a physical toll. And so when I heard this yesterday, it just kind of stacks onto that, and then I think, because my kid's 3.5 years old and, Charlie's kids are probably about that age. And I realize look, no matter who somebody is in the political arena, it's very easy to memify them, right? To make them you're a public figure, so you understand it. People make you a two-dimensional character, right? But all of us are truly people, right? We're people that have families, have lives and stuff. And that hit me about Charlie when I recognized the fact that he had kids, And I think, so yeah, yesterday took a toll. Yesterday, I sat around and thought, like, do we need to be more concerned about security? But I also recognize that if I would back away from the arguments and back away from the fight, violence wins, right? Violence is winning.
Yep.
And by the way, you've traveled to a lot of, war zones and struggling places. How many times have you been to either Afghanistan or Iraq or a country like that and talked to legislators who are under constant threat? Right? This is actually the fact that our politicians aren't under threat, generally is actually kind of unique for most of the world.
That's true.
Mm-hmm.
At this point, although, increasingly, I mean, even
right.
I'm a public figure at a minor level, but when I interviewed the president and his people didn't like it, Disney sent security out here because they scraped the internet and they found some stuff. Yep. It wasn't stuff that bothered me that much, but it scared my kids.
Yeah.
right? I took them out to interview to introduce themselves to the fellows who were here, and they were great, but they were for a couple of weeks because. And then when Disney fired me, they said, we should send you to security again." And my wife said, "No, no, 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 no."
Not now.
Not now. We don't want that. But look, I want to ask you about the investigation. So just because I wanted to draw on your experience in uniform. So the fella that they're putting out as their prime suspect, these pictures, you've seen him. He's got this sweatshirt, which apparently is a wounded veteran sweatshirt. Not that, but it was a hell of a shot, right? I mean, I don't shoot guns very much at all. We have seen the trouble that a lot of veterans have come out of. I'm sure you've worked with people like that. I don't want to pin that on this, but what do you make of the investigation that it's a young man who had that kind of skill set and is apparently wearing what looks to be a wounded veteran thing? Do you make anything of that at all?
Yeah, I mean, look, it probably is what it feels like, right? I mean, first off, we obviously don't know the motivation, but I think I'd be surprised if it's not a political motivation, right? So I think we need to be clear. We don't know, but we probably know. And, look, when it comes to people, this is actually a big concern of mine when it comes to particularly veterans coming out of service. And I want to be careful on this because most veterans that come out, they don't struggle with PTSD issues or they get help for it. But one of my biggest concerns has been when you get out of the service, if you're a 22-year-old man, right? Particularly when there was war, but even now, you come out and, you experienced a life where you and I talked about being a man last time we did this together. You experience a life where you're kind of at the apex of what men are built for, right? Fighting for a cause, like, battle, whatever. And then all of a sudden you're out and you're searching for a purpose. And I think this is where a lot of kind of veterans that come out can go astray because it's like, now what is the purpose? I did 22 years in the Air Guard in the Air Force, and I still realized that was part of my identity and I struggle with it. Well, you take somebody that was 22 years old and that was their only identity. And so it is quite possible that somebody was having a mental break. Maybe who knows what their politics are, and they made this decision because it was kind of like a cause or a fight. It's also possible, that this person has no military connections. A 200-yard shot or whatever it was, in and of itself, if somebody's never shot a gun, that's a difficult shot to make. If you've shot before, it's not that hard. Now, the big thing that somebody with the military would have an advantage of is being able to control their breath, control their emotion, and do that without getting trembly and scared. But yeah, it certainly appears somebody knew how to shoot. I don't know if that necessarily reached the level of military sniper, as I've seen some people suggest, or anything like that. And we'll just have to see.
Yeah, it's a lot farther. For example, I remember going to Dallas once, and the school book depository where Lee Oswald killed Kennedy from, and actually, if you've ever been, he's actually right on top of. I mean, with a scope, it's not that I would be able
It's
to do
not
it,
as hard as they said. Yeah, as it seems. Yep.
yeah. Whereas this is, but I want to ask you about the other or another possibility of the forces at work in our society and how they trigger violence. I got very angry last night. I was on CNN. I kept it inside of me.
I saw you on CNN, yeah.
So I kept it inside of me. But Adam, I'm just furious. I'm just so angry at our tech overlords, right? And how they are making billions of dollars, stirring hatred, jealousy, resentment, fear, envy, all those things because they know that it works, that they've unlocked the key to our primitive brain or whatever it is, and they deliberately divide us. They deliberately do it. And here we are to the point where people are gunning down a guy, he's speaking on campus and all the other things that go along with this. And I'm just, the reason I'm angry and frustrated is because I don't see any out except shame, right? These people don't and look at them. 4 years ago, they were all totally progressives. The other day, they're at the White House groveling before Trump. So they don't believe in a damn thing. And they're hurting our children and they're hurting our society. And I think at the bottom of it, that's part of it too. I mean, that's my feeling.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're 100% right, and I think these are folks that, their politics, even if they are truly right wing now, that goes to show they probably didn't have any real serious beliefs if they're willing to just move like that, or they could be easily convinced. I mean, these are people that really, probably had no friends in high school and now have a chance to like kind of get there.
That's totally it.
Yeah.
Our tech overlords are the people that, in
they got stuffed in too many lockers. um, and but yeah, I mean, look, it's this is how it's always been. I think one of the issues and the problem is we don't have the politicians in place to deal with this now. One of the issues we're going to have to look at is repealing, I think it's Section 230, which protects these platforms against lawsuits, basically saying they're conveyances and they don't own the speech. At some point we need to be clear that there is some responsibility for the speech. The problem is when they did do that a few years ago after January 6th, for instance, since at that moment it was targeted to the right became, this belief that all the tech was against the right. And I do think there was some bias there, but
for sure.
If there was a way to do this independently, that's what we have to, because the thing I worry about is, yes, we all deeply believe in the First Amendment. There are limits to that. You can't incite people to violence. And then ultimately, what happens if we just get to a point where we're stirring each other up and we can't sustain it? And unfortunately, we don't have the leaders in place. The thing I'll say is if we have leaders that were at least willing to bring down the temperature, that would be part of it, right? You think back to the 60s when there was a lot of violence, probably equivalent to today. You didn't have presidents stirring the pot. You didn't have political leaders on either side stirring the pot. Now you do. And I think leadership has a massive impact. I think the president and other leaders actually have more of an impact on culture than we realize.
I think that's a great point. I'm old enough to remember all that. Actually, my earliest memory is I remember the killing of Lee Harvey Oswald.
Wow.
I was a little boy sitting on the floor in the den and all the grown-ups were ready to go to church. It was a Sunday. And I remember it because it was on the TV and everybody was freaking out around me. But I remember my mother freaking out at the killing of Martin Luther King Jr., my brother coming up, waking up the house at 2 a.m, Bobby Kennedy's been shot. All of them coming home from college when Kent State happened. And you're right, with the exception of George Wallace, who was stirring things up deliberately and engaging in that way, that leadership was trying to calm people. And the impact, the cultural impact, I've always thought it this way. Trump is a very powerful figure and intelligent in a way that I don't recognize, but he clearly isn't stupid. He's like carnivorous intelligence. He knows how to get into your guts and stir them up. He gives people permission to be the worst version of themselves, and they gleefully take him up on that. And
listen, I was going to say, if I can interrupt,
sure.
I believe that everybody every day has a battle in their heart between like light and darkness, right? And that's a daily battle. Some days the darkness wins, some days the light wins, but letting the darkness overtake you is easier because it's just your base instincts. I don't trust these people. I don't like these people, right? That's easy. When a person with authority stands up and speaks the dark parts of your heart back to you, it gives you permission to let that overtake you. And I think that's what's happened.
Absolutely. And I was thinking last night, if I'd been asked, what's the solution? Obviously, I don't have any solution, but I do know it needs radical change. And to me, the most radical thing that anyone ever said was said by a carpenter from Nazareth 2,000 years ago: love your enemy. Mm-hmm. That's radical. You want to be radical? You want to be radical on the right? You want to be radical on the left? The most radical thing you can do is put that in your heart and try to live it. And that 100%. Sounds foolish and all that, but it is. I mean, we need a little bit more of that in the world.
Yeah, we do. And that's the thing is it's he was ultimately crucified because he was a radical. And, and that's exactly right. Everything he said, including, render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's, which is basically like, you don't have to fight to overthrow the government. That's what they expected. Jesus was going to come and overthrow the Roman Empire, and he didn't do that. And the point is the radical thing was love, right? It's easy to hate.
Yeah. One more on the Charlie Kirk of it all. I have a belief. I actually don't have proof of this, but I have a belief that I'm counting on being true, that most Americans are still normal. That actually they don't want to tear each other's faces off or have some kind of civil war or are completely intolerant. They have strong beliefs. The stakes are very high. I'm in this proudly and freely acknowledging that I am on one side of the political divide when it comes to this in a way that I wasn't in the first term because I didn't think he was the kind of threat he is now. But having that sense that perhaps because of my neighborhood, but otherwise that this really, we could say this isn't who we are. Obviously, this is who we are. It keeps happening. But that great silent majority, that great muddled middle of the country that really doesn't want to get involved in politics, how did they get summoned or what moves them? This won't, I don't think. What moves them to take the helm again, to steer the ship?
Look, ultimately, I think it's leaders. I mean, I really do. I think, is it possible that there are organic things that come out of, let's just call it the great middle, and it's not even about what they believe. It's just, we'll call it temperament, right?
Yes, exactly.
Do I think it's possible that it could organically arise? Sure. But I also have seen when you get leaders, let's say presidential candidates, let's just use presidential candidates that inspire people and can speak the better angels into them. I mean, I think of, for the right, it was Ronald Reagan. For the left, it was Barack Obama.
No question.
These figures that pop up that start talking about hope and change and inspiration, they can lead movements and they can compel things. Donald Trump did that, actually. It just wasn't a good result. He brought a lot of people that were politically inactive because he spoke fears into them. But I think if there's leaders that can speak hope, and my hope is that there is going to be somebody that comes along that can inspire the masses to that, where they realize, because here's the biggest thing, Terry. It's not even about, I'm 47, I've got another, if I'm lucky, 40 years on this earth, but it goes by fast.
Tell me,
my kid has a lot of time left. And the question is my generation, am I going to leave him a crappy country that no generation prior has ever passed down a worse country, generally? They've always passed down a better country. Am I going to be the first generation to give my kid a worse country or not? And I think when people recognize that that's a stake, and it's not just them, it's not just their anger, it's not just what they see on Fox News, it's what it means for their kids and the legacy they're leaving. It's going to take time, but that kind of person, I think, can be the one that inspires this change, because right now it's just far too easy for us to get in this reactive cycle where we're mad at these guys, so we're mad, and it just explodes. Somebody's got to break that cycle. And when they do, I think that silent majority rises up.
And rises up. I think that's exactly true. I mean, it's the importance of leadership. Right now, Democrats believe they need a fighter and a scrapper. Obviously, people from Newsom to Pritzker to others are out there demonstrating that they can take on a very powerful president who is trying to, in my judgment, arrogate powers to himself that no president ever has, and is therefore a threat to the stability of the country, of our democracy. But what you're talking about is something different. Calling us to be Americans again.
Yeah,
and I don't see that.
Yeah, and I don't know if that'll happen in 2028. I mean, I think the thing we have to realize and be ready for is it took us 30 years to get here. I mean, look, I was stewed in right-wing circles, right? Like, I understood the anger that's starting with Rush Limbaugh and then Fox News and now Newsmax. And if you watch that and consume that media for 30 years, you become radicalized. It's going to take some time to, I don't know if we want to like positively radicalize. I don't know. But to bring people to that inspiration level. So maybe it's 2028. Maybe somebody pops up. 2028 may be the need that Democrats just need a fighter that's going to fight back. And that person comes along in 2032. Who knows? And maybe it's not even anybody that runs. Maybe it's somebody else. But I will say this to any presidential candidate in 28. Yes, fight. be aggressive. Democrats have to fight, this funding battle at the end of September. They capitulated last time. They have to fight. But you can fight and talk about doing that politically. And at the same time, here's that message. Here's my broader message. My broader message is, as Americans, we are far better than this. As Americans, we have everything in our hand that we can inspire to be a country that we've never even dreamed of. We have billions of people around the world, Terry, every day that wake up and think about the United States of America. No other country has that. I was in Canada, and the Canadian defense minister said to me, he goes, I don't know if you know this, but every day we wake up and think about you guys. And it was kind of funny, but that's what the world is. And they look to us for inspiration. We lead movements. When we have violence, there's violence other places. When we have inspiration, there's inspiration other places. We're the freaking United States of America, and we have to take that legacy back.
And I think that's great. There's no question about it that people around the world, one of the things that I think is stupid and immoral about the anti-immigrant fervor here is the sense, and Charlie Kirk, to be fair, was part of this argument, that they're alien from us. You will never meet. I live in a very diverse neighborhood. A lot of people. I would say the high school is probably almost half non-native born. And they're from all over, South Asia, East Asia, Central and South America, of course. And you will never meet a stronger American than somebody who moved here.
Totally.
I mean, they love that. What do they want? They want to be Americans, right?
Yep. What is it? I think more than half of new business starts are immigrants. And that's the energy behind the country. I mean, my family came in 1850 from Germany. That's, all the Germans settled the Midwest then. And it's like, my family in 1850 didn't speak English. Probably that generation kept speaking German. The kids now started speaking English. And that happens with every generation of new people that come. But that blood, the new blood into America is necessary, particularly too, even outside of the moral side of it. Our population is growing at a less percentage than we need to keep up with China, for instance. I think the country needs to grow at like 3%, and we're growing at like 1.3 last I checked. And so the 1.7 is the delta that we need to make up. And now we're kicking people out on top of that.
Right. That's crazy. And it also makes me think that, having traveled around, I lived overseas twice, I've been to 80 some countries, so what struck me that we don't understand here, and you've just gotten back from Europe, I believe we feel we're horribly divided. We are having this terrible, terrible time in our history. But you could take any American, you could pick them up, put them anywhere on the planet, and within 10 minutes, everybody within several hundred yards ago, there's an American.
Yeah.
We have one common cultural identity, whether we know it or not.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe it has to do with our egalitarianism. We are naturally comfortable. We think we have the right to be anywhere and to say what we want to say because we're Americans. And that boldness, that sense of personhood that we get because we're Americans, I think is recognized everywhere. My favorite example of it, I might have told you this story, stop me if I did, is Jim Thorpe. So Jim Thorpe, greatest athlete of the 20th century, arguably, except for Michael Jordan, of course. He won both the decathlon and the pentathlon in the 1912 Olympics. And so he went up to get his medal and his laurel from the King of Sweden. And the world's press was around there because he was the hit of that Olympics. And the king says, "Sir, you are the greatest athlete in all the world." And in front of the reporters, Thorpe says, "Thanks, King," and walks away. and that's an American. Really, and that's still who we are.
Yep. Yeah, and I think that's an important point because, look, if I just said I'm ethnically German. If you put me in Germany, physically, I would look like most everybody there. But they would spot it probably pretty quick, not just because I'm speaking English, but there is some kind of a swagger we have, and I think it's a good thing. And I think we've been forced. There's Muslims, there's Jews, there's Christians, there's atheists in this country. There's people from Germany, from England, from Africa, from South America. We've had to learn to come together and work together, and I think that that ability, that demand to do that has made us a very strong country that can get through where we're at. But we just need people to get us there.
Okay, I know you're a little short on time, but I want to get one or two more questions in. One, you were just overseas, and I haven't been overseas, I guess, for a few months. Are we doing irreparable damage to to our standing in the world, to that sense of admiration, jealousy, kind of that sense of American greatness that radiates around the world, for better and for worse? Are people like, I get the feeling people are heartbroken about the loss of what they thought the United States was.
Yeah, I think irreparable in the short term with the right leadership, maybe that can be repaired in the long term. But yes, I mean, look, who would have imagined before we knew Donald Trump would ever be a president? Who would have imagined a Russian invasion of the largest country in Europe that the United States got involved in helping and then backed away from? Why? Oh, because you had a bunch of troops there and they got killed? No, we didn't have any troops there because we just got exhausted by it. And we had an opportunity to take out one of our greatest adversaries for a fraction of what we spend every year on defense preparing for that scenario. And then we look at, just the moral leadership, just, the vice president saying Europe needs to carry their own weight, when, by the way, the United States of America built the strongest Navy and told the Europeans that we will patrol the seas because it's to our advantage to do it. And if you remember back on that signal chat, that's when Hegseth said, the Europeans need to carry their weight here. We should be proud of being Americans, and instead we pretend like we're carrying this damn burden that we can't bear. That burden is the very reason we're as successful as we are. In World War II, every factory in the world seemingly was destroyed. And so the United States of America, instead of retreating back to our shores because the war was super tough, we stayed engaged. And in 1950, we had this massive explosion of manufacturing in this country, this great middle class growth, because the rest of the world destroyed themselves and we inherited that. That's why the manufacturing grew. Not because of Opie, not because of, Mayberry. It grew because we stayed engaged in a world that destroyed itself. And that's what we have to remember. And unfortunately, I feel like that reputation has had a lot of damage.
Yeah, and it is going to take a lot of work at the very least, or we're going to enter into the post-American hegemony. And although, who would you rather have? The United States of America, even at its worst, or China? And I mean, I think there's several Asian countries that will tell you history there. All right, last question. Now, I'm a Bears fan. Did you Did you maintain your sporting allegiances?
No, now we're going to talk about the game. Listen, let me just say this. I got very arrogant the first quarter.
Same.
Okay? I was watching this with some Vikings fans. I got arrogant. And I realized later that these are the Bears. Never get arrogant on them. Did they look good? Sure. But they did the typical lose it all in the end. So I'm going to maintain my hope. But I've got to tell you, I'm already feeling pretty sick about it.
Same. And so are you going to raise your son as a Bears fan? I tried, and he took a look at the team, and he was like, when he's a little boy, and he looked at Mitch Trubisky, and he was like, no, he's a Kansas City Chiefs fan, because Mahomes is basically the Michael Jordan of that generation. So he's fan now. So
I will try to raise him a Bears fan, but look, if I came from space and had no allegiances and could pick an NFL team, I'd probably be a Green Bay Packers fan, because it's like the whole story of this small little town owning a team. So I won't let him be a Packers fan, though. I can't do that.
No, I can't. I went to school up in Appleton, Wisconsin, just down the road from Green Bay, and I would go to games with my Bears sweatshirt on and get an earful up there. But now I can't even. I've got a friend who's a Packers fan. He never lets me forget it.
Insufferable.
All right, Adam Kinzinger. Great to see you again.
You too, buddy. It was good.
Thank you. Let's hope and pray for better days, right?
Here. Yeah, we need that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for staying.